So today's topic is thinking collaboratively, an introduction, and this is for the Psychology 2020 course at Wright State University Lake Campus, and I am Dr. Dave Hochstein. We'll be talking about some of the content from Chapter 1 of Garrison's 2014 book, Thinking Collaboratively, Learning in a Community of Inquiry. So this is for week 2 of the semester, and today's session is asynchronous, which means that it's already been pre-recorded. However, you should still remove all distractions and be ready to give your full attention to the class, and that means muting your phones, shutting the door, making sure that you won't otherwise be disturbed. We will have you run the audio-video setup for each of the sessions. For this particular session, though, we'll make sure that your audio is working, and you can do that by clicking the arrow next to the microphone icon in the bottom left corner and selecting the correct speaker. And during the session, you should be prepared to pause the session while typing your answers in the session reflections. These answers should be short. Most can be completed in 2 to 3 sentences, and make sure to label each reflection so I know what you're answering. Very quickly running through a quality check, because again, even though this is an asynchronous session, we still want to make sure that you'll be able to adequately hear the presentation. So if you can hear me speaking right now, make sure the volume is set so you can comfortably hear me. If you can't hear me speaking right now, you'll have to click the arrow next to the microphone icon, which is right here, and select audio settings and test your speaker and microphone. And if that doesn't work, you may have to select a different speaker. If neither of those fix your problem, please contact me before continuing further. So today's learning objectives are that you should be able to define collaborative thinking and explain why today's technology makes it a necessity. So first, we're going to run through a very quick story, and it's a story that most of you have probably heard, but we'll still run through it quickly just in case you haven't. So we've got a group of blind men that have heard of a strange animal called an elephant, and it's been brought into town, but none of them are aware of its shape or its form. Out of curiosity, they want to figure out what it is, and to do so, they need to touch it. And when they finally find it, each feels a different part. The first, whose hand lands on the trunk, thinks it's a snake. The second, on feeling it's an ear, thinks it's a fan. A third, who felt its leg, said it was a pillar, like a tree trunk. Each feels a different part, and each thinks of the elephant to be very different things. So for session reflection number 1, pause the video and consider something a little more abstract than an elephant. Let's say you are in high school and someone asks about what college is like. Give 3 different types of answers you might get if you asked 3 different people. So collaborative thinking, what do we mean by that? Well, we're taking an activity most of us think of as a private activity, and we engage with others when thinking about the same issue. And this shared thinking, this shared learning allows us to come up with ideas that we wouldn't necessarily come up with ourselves. Collaborative learning is a proven success. Garrison tells us that companies are far more successful when built on a culture of collaboration. Woolley et al. From 2015 reports that most innovations in science and technology are driven by collaborative thinking, not lone experimenters. So for session 2, pause the video and think about the elephant story that we just hit, and let me know if it is an example of collaborative thinking and indicate why you think it is or not. If it is not an example of collaborative thinking, give it a sentence about why collaborative thinking might in fact be a better way to learn about an elephant. This brings us to an important distinction between cooperation and collaboration. Cooperation is not the same thing. Cooperation simply means everyone contributes instead of everyone being influenced by each other. Cooperation gets the job done faster than if you're working by yourself. But if it's collaborative learning, people learn from each other, grow in their abilities, and this is what's really going to be promoting innovative thinking. So for session reflection number 3, pause the video and try to remember a time when you collaborated with a team instead of just cooperating. Explain what you did in a sentence and indicate why it was collaboration instead of cooperation. Why is collaborative learning a necessity? Well, social media has given rise to algorithms that track what we like to look at, and then only gives us the information that fits with what we already like to look at. And this leads to filter bubbles. It's a term coined by internet activist Eli Pariser in 2011. It basically means that you've been isolated from information and perspectives you haven't already expressed an interest in, which means you may miss out on important information. Collaborative thinking is a necessity because it allows us to go beyond that filter bubble, to explore new ideas and perspectives, and it does so by having us actively engaging with other people. So for session reflection number 4, pause the video and think of your own life. In a sentence or two, when was the last time you saw a topic on social media that you disagreed with and then had a rational discussion about? So we're going to have a couple of scenarios here. Let's say you're studying for an exam in the cognition and learning class, and you've got a study guide that gives you a lot of questions about the material. So in your group, you've decided to split that study guide up, and you take the first chapter questions, Jamie takes the second chapter questions, Corey takes the third chapter questions, and everyone in the group writes down their answers, and the group shares them, but there isn't really any discussion about why particular answers are correct. Ask yourself if this would be an example of cooperation or collaboration. And the answer is cooperation. While each person is doing their part, there's no real discussion and no real changing about how people think about the material themselves. Oh, I didn't realize that would stay. So for section reflection number 5, pause the video and try to describe how you might make that scenario more like collaborative thinking instead of being more cooperative. A second scenario here, a career scenario. So let's say you're working on deciding what type of careers you might be interested in after getting your degree in psychology. Hopefully this is something you're doing because this is the Careers in Psychology course. One way to approach it might be to ask your friends and family what types of careers they think you might be good at. But have them tell you ideas that you wouldn't have thought of yourself. And instead of having them just tell you these things, engage in discussion with them about it. Try to learn why they picked those particular careers for you. And here, ask yourself if this would be an example of cooperation or collaboration. And this would be an example of collaboration because there's actually real discussion occurring and some very real potential to change how you think about the options that you have available to you. So for session reflection number 6, pause the video and try to describe how you might make the scenario contain a bubble filter like we talked about before. What would you have to change about that scenario to include the effects of a bubble filter? So in summary, collaborative thinking creates opportunities for us so that we can go outside of what we already know, so that we can learn about and incorporate other people's perspectives. And again, this allows us to innovate, allows us to come up with new solutions because we can get beyond or grow outside of our own limitations. So for session reflection 7, go back to what you wrote for session reflection number 3. What were you able to understand more fully because of the multiple viewpoints associated with collaborative thinking? Collaborative thinking also gives us the ability to think about issues from a variety of perspectives, and that gives us a better overall understanding of the issue. And this means that we're not as likely to be stuck in our own filter bubble, which has become, unfortunately, increasingly important in today's social media-driven lives. For your very last session reflection, pause the video and go back to what you wrote for session reflection number 2. Give a sentence or two about how that elephant story can illustrate filter bubbles, and then what you would have to change in the story to make it demonstrate collaborative thinking instead. And finally, make sure to be prepared because at the end of the week, we will be having a mini exam that includes tests of your understanding of collaborative thinking, filter bubbles, and the difference between collaboration and cooperation. And those may be in the form of identification in scenarios, maybe definitions, maybe short answer questions. Thank you much for joining me today, and I hope to see you in class soon.